Yes, welcome. As I presume all of you know, I'm Vitaly Chernetsky, the director of the Center for Russian and East European and Eurasian Studies here at the University of Kansas. And I am delighted to welcome all of you to the final Brownbag lecture presentation of this academic year. And by tradition, we have a very happy and special event for the final Brownbag lecture. This is the presentation of the research by the students who were deemed the winners of the annual Laird essay contest, established through the generosity of Betty Laird, whom we're very happy to see here, and honoring the memory of Dr. Roy Laird. The entries in the contest are given full peer review evaluation, double blind, so the jury of faculty members received anonymized entries for both graduate and undergraduate students. And our two presenters today, Travis Toon on the graduate side and Ashlie Koehn on the undergraduate side, were judged the winners of this year's contest. They will receive a cash prize. Travis will also receive a special bonus in book budget. And as probably the most exciting part of the contest, they will get to deliver their essays today in oral form, and they will later be published online on the CREASE website. So I will pass the baton in terms of running the event for the remainder of it to CREASE Assistant Director and wonderful and hardworking person who is sitting over there on the side, Bart Redford. And without further ado, let's move to today's program. And again, welcome and congratulations to our winners. Let's give them a round of applause before we get started.
Well, my name is Travis Toon. I'm a graduate student in the Global and International Studies department here. I study American foreign policy in the Balkans, specifically military intervention in Kosovo and the former Yugoslavia. And this is the one disclaimer I put out before I talk about Kosovo. I am neither Serb nor Albanian. I have no stake in who wins. I'm studying it because it's important towards American foreign policy. Is the trigger on?
Should work.
Which one do I press?
One of the arrow keys.
Hey,
Yeah,
all right.
there we go.
So just so we're clear where we're talking about, I just want to give everyone an overview that here, this is Serbia, it's not marked, and this is Kosovo, and Kosovo used to be the southern province of Serbia. So as you can see, Greece is in the neighborhood, Bosnia, Montenegro, Albania, Bulgaria, Romania. So just so we're all clear where we're talking about. And I don't know, most people don't know this. This is in the capital of Pristina, Kosovo. This is a statue of Bill Clinton.
Oh.
And it sits on Bill Clinton Boulevard there. So this, I'm fairly certain this is the only Bill Clinton statue in the world. But well, there could be one in Arkansas somewhere I'm not aware of. But along with Bill, you get Hillary. And this is the name of a clothing line in Kosovo. It's multiple storefronts, and it's named after, as you may guess, Hillary Clinton. And then we have George Bush Boulevard. So there's additionally Madeleine Albright Boulevard. There are various American street names, which is fascinating for us because not many of us know where Kosovo is. And this is my favorite. This is 4th of July in Pristina. So as you can see, we're, as Americans, are forever linked to Kosovo. Not only did we act as sort of the midwife of their independence, but they really like us. And so as we can, and I mean, to be fair, that they might be the only people that build a statue to Bill Clinton ever. And so as we move forward, this is the players in this game are key. And this is Hashim Thaci, but his nom de guerre is the snake, which I find a much more intriguing name to call him by. He's a former KLA commander. You can see he's here in his younger days in the middle. The KLA was a guerrilla insurgency fighting for independence from Serbia He's also was the country's first prime minister, the foreign minister, and now he's currently the president. So he's got some political juice. And then the other characters are the zajednica, which is the Serbian word for community, and this is the supposedly or supposed to be the autonomous Serbian municipalities inside of Kosovo. And that's where we pick up here. This is another gentleman that is really important to understand who he is. This is Albin Korte. He's the leader of Vetëvendosje, who is the far-right Albanian group. And this is a picture of what we're going to be talking about. Him and his, I guess, opposition to Vetëvendosje set off tear gas in the parliament at least 10 times in the last year. And they're irritated about a few things, but he said he'd rather have 30 minutes of tear gas than 30 years of the zajednica. So that can tell you some of the attitudes toward the Serbs in Kosovo. This is Hashim Thaci, the snake, in 2012 on his first visit to Washington as the Prime Minister of Kosovo. As you can see, he didn't seem to want to reciprocate the feelings that the Kosovo Albanians wanted initially. The reason they began an uprising was their autonomy was rescinded. And now he's denying the same autonomy to the Serbian minority. So it's ironic, hypocritical, whatever you'd like to call it. So this is important. This is Kosovo now by the numbers. As you can see, it's a very high unemployment rate, but 60% for those under 24, and they have the youngest population in Europe as well. And this is really the big one for me. This is the University of Pristina's enrollment. As of 2013, was 47,000 people. And so if you're going to graduate there, you're going to end up in this crew here. So this number can only go up. And this is a population pyramid of Kosovo, just so you're aware. Obviously much more young, or many more young people than older. So another critical portion for Kosovo right now is the migrant crisis. Kosovo Albanians have been trying to get to Germany because there's a large Albanian population in Germany. There have been since the Yugoslav days. But this is what's fascinating to me is that this is a January 2015 number, 3,000. And from the end of November 2015 until February when this article was written, 50,000 Kosovo Albanians had left. A lot of them had, I guess, I don't want to say snuck in, but they blend in well with the migrant groups moving through the Balkans in general. And as we've seen, Kosovo doesn't have a lot to offer their citizens. It was always the most underdeveloped province within Yugoslavia. And so the idea of giving them independence was surprising because they hadn't really done much economically to begin with. So what were they possibly going to do when they became an independent state? So this is a very crucial portion of the Yugoslav crisis. This was the 1974 constitution. This is where the Serbs were no longer ruling Kosovo. They were essentially given autonomy within. So this is when the Albanians took over leadership of Kosovo within Yugoslavia. And as you can see, the first bullet point is that it led to increased instruction in Albanian. So the Albanians stopped learning Serbo-Croatian, which was the official language of Yugoslavia and spoken in all the other republics. So the Albanians couldn't leave the province to work anywhere because they couldn't speak the language. Additionally, as you see, the faculty of Albanology opened up, and a majority of their graduates studied Islamic art or Albanian literature and folklore. So, and only 20% studied science and technology. And in a socialist manufacturing economy, it doesn't help to have a lot of Islamic art majors. So, and then at this time, crucially, Kosovo had the highest rate of college students of any other republic within Yugoslavia. So they had 36,000 students enrolled in the school, but it was only built to accommodate a third of that number. So as you can imagine, they were sleeping sometimes 2 or 3 to a bed. They didn't have very good quality of food because they didn't have the resources. This is a socialist country. They don't have the resources to feed or house that many people. So it led to a street riots in 1981. And this is where the correlation between right now's crisis and this crisis for me happens, is because these were both periods of Albanian rule within Kosovo. The Serbs had no part in what was going on here. And essentially, at this time, they were really demonstrating against the government, but it was more so Serbs within Kosovo. So this is a major crucial point because this is when Serbs began to leave in mass within the Yugoslav period. So Albanians had a higher birth rate than any other group, so there were more of them being produced. There was discrimination by the Albanian authorities, I guess, in retribution for earlier Serbian. And the Serbs were, under Alexander Rankovic, were very, very oppressive, and that's why the Albanians were given autonomy within Yugoslavia. But They just started doing the same thing to the Serbs. And then as well as Enver Hoxha's regime in Albania, which happens to be located just across the mountains from Kosovo, had many people fleeing to live in Kosovo. And then in the bottom here you can see the decrease in the Serbian population. In 30 years it went down by 14%, and now it's estimated around 5%, and this is where the national sport of Kosovo is boycotting the other ethnic group census. So we don't really know or have any good information on the amount of Serbs when the Albanians would do a census, and such as right now, the Serbian minority refuses to submit their information to it. So we don't know exactly how many Serbs live within Kosovo. And the same way we didn't know how many Albanians live because they would refuse the Yugoslav census. And now we get to 2015. So that was a little bit of background info. Tough year for Kosovo in their neighborhood. They were denied membership to UNESCO, United Nations, it's about essentially protected sites, heritage sites within the country. They were denied that because in 2004 there were more riots, which I would have loved to write about, but there was a word limit. And they destroyed about 100 Serbian Orthodox churches, cemeteries, and many of them were on the UNESCO list. So many countries within UNESCO felt that that would be difficult to allow a group that has openly destroyed UNESCO sites into the group. And what's ironic is that many countries who've already recognized Kosovo as a country didn't vote for them to be in UNESCO. So they understood that there was a distinction to be made between recognizing you and, I guess, supporting the behavior. The Zajednica agreement with Serbia was also signed. This essentially laid out the official groundwork for the 10 Serbian autonomous municipalities within Kosovo. And it also allows for parallel funding from Belgrade. So essentially, the Belgrade government in Serbia gets to fund the Serbian minority within Kosovo, which is kind of unprecedented, but the entire Kosovo idea is really unprecedented. Then border demarcation agreement with Montenegro is key, which is the Kosovo Albanians argue that it's an affront to their sovereignty, that to have this border demarcation, and of course the argument would be, well, the Montenegrins don't want to lose any territory either. And if the Montenegrins are okay with it, why are you guys not okay with it? So there's a few arguments within Kosovo that the Zajednica and the border demarcation are being used by the opposition. They don't really have a legitimate opposition to it, but they're just opposing it because it has to do with essentially ceding autonomy to their neighbors. And then the establishment of a court to try KLA criminals. They've been trying to but they've been essentially attempting to try Kosovo Liberation Army criminals. But in Kosovo, it's very difficult because not many people speak the dialect of Albanian spoken within Kosovo, and there's a very tight-knit clan dynamic involved. So it's difficult to get people to testify against others without another member of their family possibly being in danger. And The Hague has noted on more than one occasion heavy witness intimidation surrounding trials of KLA members. And then perhaps the most crucial is they were denied entry into the EU visa-free regime. So tough year. It's 5 really tough blows to a country who still is not officially recognized as a nation by the United Nations. Kosovo is still a quasi-state. They don't have official recognition. And so this is the Zajednica. The blue ones are where the Serbs live. As you can tell, they aren't in one coherent area. They're isolated in these various spots. And this is the argument, is that you've seen the decrease in the Serbian population over 30, 40 years. If these groups don't have an autonomous status, they will be gone eventually. And so what I find amusing, but this is obviously a Serbian map, because the top says the municipalities of Kosovo according to the laws of the so-called Republic of Kosovo. Serbia doesn't recognize Kosovo's independence officially. So this is a map from a Serbian newspaper calling them so-called or self-proclaimed, kind of making that distinction. So there are 2 other municipalities. There aren't 10 here, there are 8. And then this is split in half. The northern part is Serbian, and there's another one out here that a portion is Serbian. But this happened. So let me go back. So we have this. 2015, there are 5 reasons people are really kind of frustrated. Not only are they graduating from college with no jobs and no opportunities, but they can't leave. They can't move to any other European country. They have to stay in Kosovo. This was a truck that was overturned by Vetvendosi activist Albin Korte, who I mentioned. This truck was carrying textbooks from Kosovo to Serbia. Kosovo wanted this distributed to Albanian-speaking children living in southern Serbia, not in Kosovo, in the portion north of Kosovo. And the textbook said that Kosovo was an independent country full of Albanians. That's the opposite of the Serbian official government stance, so they sent the truck back and said, no, we're not just, giving these textbooks out that are contrary to our official position, and the Albanian activists overturned it and said it was a violent provocation by Serbia to send the textbooks back. This is what Hashim Thaci said about the denial of Schengen area access. And as you can tell, it probably didn't do them very many favors with the Brussels leadership. And this is actually from a Kosovar newspaper. And you see the Albanian flag in Albania going to the EU and leaving Kosovo behind. They see themselves as almost brothers, kin in a way. And one thing I should also point out is this is the official flag of Kosovo. This is the official flag of Albania. This is the one you see in Kosovo. This isn't one you will rarely ever see. So after the agreements are made, this Vetven Josi group, the far right, control about 20-25% of the seats in the parliament, decided to throw eggs at members of the government who had made the decisions. They thought they were selling out their brothers from Kosovo. So this is the deputy foreign minister, Petrit Salimi, and as you can see, he's got egg all over his head. They threw them at the prime minister and anybody else who was involved in the parliament that day. This is Albin Korte again, and he's attempting to pepper spray. This is the president, and this is the snake, the prime minister, Hashim Thaci. So he's this is inside the Kosovo Parliament. He's attempting this. And then the eggs didn't work. The pepper spray didn't work. So they moved to smoke bombs and tear gas. This is inside the Kosovo Parliament. And as you can see, this is our friend Albin Korte. And I cut the other photo out, but he dropped it here and kicked it across to his, rivals on the other side of the room. These were Kosovo politicians trying to show up to work that day. So it's a fascinating dynamic, and of course you see these things in the news, and it's amusing, it's almost funny. But how could something like this ever be allowed to join the European community? This is not something that people in the Netherlands or France or England are looking at. They don't think this is funny. They think this is absurd. These were the street protests that led from that. So not only did we have the violence within the parliament, but they tried to bring the country to a screeching halt. And as I pointed out, all red flags, all red and black. Those are the symbols of Albania, the double-headed eagle. And you notice there aren't any Kosovo flags here. And that's a larger message that we can get to in a moment. Again, this is another angle. And I would like you to remember this really nice glass building here. This is the Kosovo government building. And these are the protests that began. And just to show you, these are two of the people that are out there. This isn't some violent group of skinheads or soccer hooligans. These are normal students from Kosovo. But at the same time, frustrations, especially in the Balkans, can run over. And this is where it began. This is red paint being thrown at the police on the police line by students in Kosovo. And these are just a few pictures of the violent street protest that ended up with, I think, 50 policemen injured on the first night and very few arrests. And it's just a very hostile and dangerous atmosphere. And the point I would make is that this is 2016. This is 16 years after the Serbs have been out of power in Kosovo. This has all been made by the Kosovo Albanian government currently in power. And this is that nice building I asked you to look at. They set it on fire. So, and of course my question is, who's going to pay to rebuild that? There's not a lot of money flowing around in Kosovo. How are we going to pay if we destroy everything we kind of have? So we're already down in the hole on that, then we have to try to build out of that? That's not a very reasonable stance. So this is just another one to kind of show kind of the violence going on. It was, very serious. And went on for 3 months. This is from a basketball game in Belgrade, Serbia. And this is Red Star Belgrade. They were playing in the EuroLeague, the large pan-European competition. And the second line there says, "Freedom for Oliver Ivanovic." Oliver Ivanovic was the head of the Kosovo Serbs, the political speaker, the man who's willing to work with the Kosovo Albanians in Kosovo for the betterment of the Serbs. He's not one of those that denies the independence. He says, look, we just want to make sure the Serbs get the best deal. Right after the Zajednica agreement, Oliver Ivanovic was sentenced to 9 years in prison in Kosovo for war crimes. And they didn't say he had committed the war crimes. They said he knew that some people he knew had committed war crimes, and so he was guilty. And so these things that happen in Kosovo don't just affect Kosovo. This is the capital of Serbia. They're playing. This is a Turkish team. They're playing a EuroLeague tournament, and they're protesting the arrest of a guy in Kosovo. So this is a very region-wide problem. This isn't just contained in Kosovo. This is the big problem. This is a map of Albanian speakers in Southeast Europe. And as you can tell, they don't quite align with the borders of Albania or Kosovo. And this has given rise to what is really, in my view, the destabilizing factor in the Balkans, is this idea of a greater Albania. And it's quite common, quite commonly espoused, and as you can see, it involves cutting off more parts of southern Serbia, eastern Montenegro, all of western Macedonia, and northern Greece. So the neighbors in the neighborhood, not really fans of the Albanians at this point because they see that as a territorial threat. And Macedonia has about 40% Albanians, so that's a very, very sizable minority that could essentially act as a fifth column almost in a way that it happened in Kosovo. So this is really where people are concerned with this Albanian nationalism, because as you saw the red flags in the street, those weren't the flags of Kosovo, those were the flags of Albania and Albanian pride and nationalism and identity. And if all of these people in these areas hold that view, we have problems. This is the final point I'll make. We've all heard of the BRICS, this reference to the emerging economies and people that will have influence. Not one of these nations recognizes Kosovo. And that's dangerous coming forward because Kosovo's pretty much maxed out the amount of people they can get to recognize them without having somebody flip, having their non-recognition become a recognition. And of all these groups, Brazil wrote the most persuasive argument to the International Criminal Justice Court, and they essentially said, we were on the UN Security Council that helped negotiate the end of the war. The independence should have come through us. It should not have been able to be self-proclaimed because now the UN Security Council has no power, no sway. If you can allow a group to develop their own independence outside the parameters of the peace agreement, agreed to by all parties at the UN, how can we expect anybody to enforce any agreement? So these five nations have a principled stance, and it really puts Kosovo into peril. Not only are these influential countries not recognizing them, they're not helping them, and additionally, they have no way to get into the European Union either because 5 EU states do not recognize Kosovo: Spain, Greece, Slovakia, Romania, and Cyprus. So Kosovo's stuck. You can see the violence, you can understand it, but there's really no way out other than granting the zajednica, the Serbian minority. But that's something they don't have an interest in. So Kosovo is where it is. And that's the end.
So our undergraduate winner of the Laird essay contest is Ashlie Koehn. And if I could impose on you after you get set up here to just tell us a little bit about yourself. Ashley's a senior this year. She's also in global and international studies as well as environmental studies and economics and minoring in environmental studies.
Yep, got it. All right. So I guess Bart's already introduced me. My name's Ashlie. It's a real pleasure to be here today. So my topic is a little bit outside of my major, but I had a lot of fun writing about it. I decided to look at fashion in the Russian context and what that has meant over the years, both starting during the imperial times, then on forward to today. Which brings up the question, obviously, why fashion? Why does fashion matter? Why does why are the clothes that we wear mean anything at all when we're analyzing global affairs? Fashion, in the clothing that we have, has a special symbolic significance. Oftentimes, we use it to carry meanings of what we stand for and what we believe in. One of my inspirations for this project was reflecting on my own heritage. My grandmothers and a lot of my cousins are Mennonites. So, they wear the dresses and the hats. And so for them, their clothing sets them apart from the rest of the world. And so in such a way, such is one of the powers of fashion. It sets people apart and it says what you stand for. And also there's a history of government intervening in the way people dress in Russia. So if it wasn't important, then why would they regulate it? So, the sort of history of regulating fashion in Russia starts with Peter the Great and his great, leap forward into the West. So over a pretty short time period, about 20 years, he issued 17 different decrees regarding how people dress and how people appear. So first off, he was you shall now all dress like Hungarians, then later Germans. the way he would implement these new policies is he would like get like little samples of how he wanted people to dress, and then he'd send them out to like local like villages, and he'd have them like hung up on the walls, and then people had a certain amount of time, you know, like a couple of months to go get their clothes redone. He also had some other policies, like men had to shave off their beards. There were some exceptions to like these rules, like clergy members of the Orthodox Church didn't necessarily have to shave off the beards. If you were really poor and you just like didn't have like the means, or if you were like a serf, then you didn't have to also abide by these rules. Obviously, these rules were not popular, to say the least. So like sometimes townspeople would go and like grab like these sort of like, you know, prototype clothes off the walls, and they would put them on pigs and let them run around. So like for like the beards, you had to like pay like a hefty tax if you wanted to keep your beard. And so if you paid the hefty tax and you got one of these cool coins that had like beards on them, you had to keep this coin on you at all times. And if you failed to produce the coin, or if you didn't pay your tax, they had roaming barbers that would come snip off your beard, which I think is kind of an amusing illustration. But this was a very like you know, heady issue for the time, because for a lot of these males, their beards had a special spiritual significance. And so there's like details of like, you know, travelers in this region throughout the time about old men that were like wanting to be buried with their beard clippings, because they think that they need like these beards to get to heaven. And so like for Peter to kind of like, you know, force everybody to either like pay a lot or, you know, shave off the beard was it's pretty controversial. And so this sort of, you know, standard of regulating how people dress continued. Catherine the Great followed this roughly. She didn't really like have as many like rigid policies. She did like tell the nobility that they had to dress simpler. She was like, she really forced people to really know Western culture, you know, knowing Western languages. I think it's interesting to note Peter the Great's daughter, who became an Empress, Empress Elizabeth. She was a little bit obsessed. She owned a lot of clothes. She had like 15,000 dresses. She changed her outfits 7 times a day. And she had this interesting policy where like nobility that were coming to official events, they had to like have this sort of booklet with them, and the guards at the gates would make a note of what they were wearing, and the next time they could not wear the same outfit twice. So like, you know, she kept a, you know, tight track on that. There's some pretty other like interesting stories about her. But anyway, so this, you know, heritage of really like forcing, like particularly like the upper class, the nobility, to dress and act differently, sort of accumulated through the age and sort of solidified the divide between like the lower class people in Russia and the upper class, which ultimately, as we all know, led to the Bolshevik Revolution, in part. So when the Bolsheviks took power in the 1920s, it radically reformed how clothing was regulated. So instead of like setting like strict standards like Peter the Great did in form of taxes, they really relied on the press. So they, you know, really like decried Western fashion and like said it was anti-revolutionary. Like for women to wear delicate clothing, for example. Like they really wanted to focus on gender equity. And so for their way of doing this, they really like focused on people wearing like very like geometric shapes, and sort of just getting away from like the delicacy that had been like so prominent previously. However, like despite these like intentions for this revolutionary new like way of people presenting themselves, they did have this new economic plan where they allowed like some amounts of like capitalistic behaviors to form. So like there were some firms that popped up that did like couture clothing for some of the still rich people that were living in the, you know, like in Moscow or St. Petersburg. So that sort of was counter to their intents. So when Stalin took power, he, you know, did away with the new economic plan to make it more equitable. However, Stalin was a big fan of sort of reinforcing the traditional gender norms. He wanted like people to dress, like he wanted women to dress more delicately and like, you know, men to dress more masculine. So he once again used the press. However, it was really hard for the Russian, or for the Soviet, for the Soviet economy to adapt to making clothing. Like, they were already struggling to adapt to industrialize, so like clothing was really tricky. So one of the things that he really relied on was like, he had all like his lead designers like publish a bunch of patterns in the magazines, and he was like, well, you know, everybody can now make your own clothing. However, people didn't have access to fabrics or needles or thread, so how were they supposed to make their own clothing when they didn't have access to the supplies? And this really was just like a pattern throughout the Soviet era. There once was this story of this Soviet diplomat's wife, and she was going back to the Soviet Union, and she was stopped on her way out, and the people were going through her bags, and they were like, wow, why do you have so much underwear in here? And like, don't you have access to this at home? And she's like, well, it's easier to go from Sputnik to from panties to Sputnik than from Sputnik to panties. And like, that's just like a comment that it's really hard for developing economies to like make that leap, you know, from like going from industrial goods to like more domestic and consumer goods. And so just like an example of like how convoluted like the system was. Oh, sorry, I should also like mention that there was this sort of like fashion, quote unquote, war that like mirrored the Cold, that was a part of the Cold War rather. So like, you know, the Soviet Union wanted to show that it was keeping pace with the West. So they wanted like the designers to make like these new clothes that were like in trend, like above like what the West was doing. However, the system was so convoluted that it was really hard for them to do this. So just as like an example, if a designer came up with a new idea for a t-shirt, or sorry, well, maybe like a dress would be a better example. They would have to go like first to the State Artistic Council, and then once that plan was approved, then they would have to go to the Ministry of Trade to set production levels, and like see like which, you know, plants could produce. They would have to go to Gosplan to set the price for the goods. Then after that, if they wanted to use like any new like dyes or like fabric, they'd have to go to Scientific Institute and get like a new approval for whatever like, you know, next steps they want to take. So by the time this is all done, by the time like, you know, things reach production, it might be like a year later, and they were a year behind what the West had done. So it was sort of a lagging system, if you will. And it was also like marred by like a lot of issues. Like, it was hard to find clothing that actually fit people because it was also industrialized and going through quickly. So a lot of issues. So once things started loosening up a little bit and black market started booming, there's became like these sort of countercultural movements. So the classic example is the stilagi. So they would, or style hunters, they would dress up in like illegal Western clothing or clothing that was based like on their perceptions of the West. And they would listen to jazz music, so kind of counter-revolutionary. So like the newspapers, once again, the Soviet government really relied on the press to try to, you know, stop people from dressing all crazy like this because it wasn't explicitly against the law. However, people still like, really became like enraptured with like, this idea of dressing like the West. There was also like this huge like couture apparel boom, especially as like people were like able to travel out more. They were able to like get people to make their own clothing. So yeah, and so like the West started to seep in. And so then after the collapse of the Soviet Union, sorry, I'm like really skipping through a lot of stuff here. Sorry. All right. It's been like really interesting to see Russia's like rapid rise on like the global fashion stage, and it's really like been a new hallmark of a new sort of economic era for the Russian Federation. Notably, like two big things apparently in the fashion world. Like they got their own fashion week about 15 years ago. About 30 years ago, they even like got their own version of Vogue. Before that, it was Harper's Bazaar that also came into the Russian market. So just sort of like signifiers of the power that Russia now has on the global fashion stage. However, still like counter to all of this, there are still people that are counter, you know, to the popular mainstream. So most notably, everyone knows of Pussy Riot. They're like, you know, very flamboyant garb and like the way that they have like very like straight cuts and you know, their face masks have really produced this very iconic brand that the Russian press is now calling counter-revolutionary, much like the stilagi before them. And I should also mention that this was like built on also like counter-cultural, like, you know, pop culture type fashion that like happened throughout the 90s as well. So this has been a trend in Russia for a while. However, since the annexation of Crimea and the Ukrainian crisis, there has been sort of this new rise, also in Russia, of this what some people are terming it as like Putinist glamour. So like there's designers that are like creating this fashion that has like Putin's face on it. Military style clothing has become very popular, so it sort of is telling about what people in Russia are feeling like. There's been a lot of speculation on what, like, if Putin continues on this isolationary path, what that's going to do to Russia's fashion industry. Like, would it, significantly damage it? But that's yet to be seen. So, that's my very short presentation. Good deal.